Okay, there we go. All right, thank you guys, everyone, for coming. I'm just going to read this disclaimer. Please note that this session is being recorded. It may include your likeness and or your voice. You have the option of muting your camera and or, you have the option of being outside of the picture if you don't want to be on the film. But participation implies authorization for MassBay to use such likeness and voice on this recording in perpetuity. And Shamsi is going to introduce Rob Higgins from Akamai.
It is my pleasure to introduce Rob Higgins. Rob is Principal Technical Account Manager. Well, that's the long title. Principal Technical Account Manager with Akamai Technologies, focusing on financial services, hence the discussion here. And do you call it fintech, financial tech? Is that what it is?
Yeah, fintech, financial technology.
Yeah. His client-facing work focuses on addressing business challenges and with technology in the areas of cybersecurity, web architecture, and API control. In his spare time, he enjoys travel and outdoor adventure with his wife and 2 children. How old are they?
They are 8 and 11.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Thank you so much, Rob.
Well, thanks, Shamsi, and thanks everybody for having me. I know this is being recorded, so I'll try not to speak only to the audience here, but today we're going to talk about fraud. Fraud is a huge, expansive landscape, so we're going to focus a little bit more on online banking, digital payments, fraud areas specifically. So, as Shamsi said, there you go. So, well, who am I? So thank you for the introduction, but just to kind of reiterate, I'm a father, a partner, a son, and this is not updating on WebEx. Here we go. Father, a partner, and a son. And this is a picture of my kids and I, and something is going on with the WebEx that's blocking out my photo, but you can see me here. There you go.
Why is there?
It's just I think it's this, these artifacts.
Yeah,
So it'll come up.
It's slow to clear it.
So I'm also a community member. So I coach Little League Baseball, I coach soccer, and I coach other, just pretty much any sport that needs volunteers. As you can see, I'm really good at controlling the kids' behaviors. They're obviously listening to everything I say. Professionally, as Shamsi mentioned, I'm a technical account manager. I'm actually principal. We do get paid by the number of letters in the title, so we try to draw it out. But I work for a company called Akamai Technology. And so what my day job really is doing is working with clients to make sure that they leverage our platform and they achieve their business goals, their business needs, through that, right? So they want to make sure that they're using the technology in a way that makes sense for their business and also scales and again, achieves those business outcomes. If you're not familiar with Akamai, we're a 25-year-old cloud computing company. We were cloud before cloud was cool. And we've leveraged that network and that experience to pivot into really a deliberate focus into cybersecurity and distributed denial of service. So using a lot of that. If you don't know us by name, you'll know us by some of our customers that we use that use our platform. We work with the largest financial services institutions, the largest government institutions, both domestically and internationally, branches of the military, healthcare providers, game streaming. I've still never played Fortnite, but I hear a lot about them at work. And also, retail and hospitality, airlines, the whole bit, right? So we're kind of an infrastructure company, a cloud company behind the brands that you use frequently. So again, why are we here? We're going to talk about fraud. We're going to talk about it in a series of some use cases, and then a little bit of a more deeper look at a couple instances that I think are most relevant and most interesting. So frauds are pervasive. There's many different types of fraud, but just what we're seeing globally here is about an estimated $343 billion in fraud estimated to be found in the digital payment space over the next few years. Zeroing in just on e-commerce, right? So retail, when you're checking out e-commerce sites, $41 billion in 2022. That's expected to balloon to $48 million in 2023. And then, kind of just a perspective on some of the more emerging payment approaches. If you're familiar with buy now, pay later, this is where when you're checking out, you don't have to actually provide any funds. You can borrow money at the time of checkout. That's an emerging payment, and we've actually seen a 211% increase in fraud on that space, right? As it's been pushed more frequently, we're seeing the fraudulent actors coming to that space much more pervasively. One of the things that's interesting to keep in mind here that we're seeing, and we'll touch on a little bit later, is that the balance of what's referred to as friction versus business outcomes. So a lot of the traditional banking institutions had a lot of friction involved. And what that meant is when you're signing up for it, you had to produce a lot of information that would validate you are who you say you are. And then they would do background checks. And that's why when you used to go to a branch, if anybody's even been to a branch office, if you go to a branch, you would go and it would take days or so to get your account open because they would run background checks, they would verify who you are. Right now, the world has changed and COVID just accelerated that change where payments and validations need to happen instantly. So what that's done is they've reduced that friction and it's reduced the touch points where they can weed out fraud and identify fraud. And so in some of these newer financial tools like buy now, pay later, there's an extremely low barrier to entry for you to sign up for it and you to get that payment. And so we're seeing much higher percentages of fraud in that space. But it's because the benefits, the business benefits for the providers of this buy now, pay later is really high. Right? Because they're basically taking the transaction fee, then adding interest on top of it. So they're sort of incentivized to get anybody in there. A similar incentive exists for gambling, right? I know it's kind of hard to see this, but in the gambling industry, it's estimated that 1 out of every 23 transactions are fraudulent. Specific to gambling, this is a huge area where money laundering is taking place, but it's also an area where the businesses have a lot more incentive to entice people to come in, make it easy for them to come in and spend money. So it's this sort of opposing goals in a sense, which leaves it open to a lot of fraudulent activity. Businesses follow the money. So this is just an eye chart. It's intended to be confusing to make the point of there's a lot of companies that are out there that are trying to help the situation. Either from a monitoring perspective, from a detection perspective, or from a reconnaissance or audit perspective that they're going to go back and look for retrieving funds. These are the types of companies that are going to be growing over the years. These are going to be like the next billion-dollar software companies as all payments move digital, banking and e-commerce, and fraud is just sort of the way the cost of doing business. So what are some examples of banking and payment fraud? I'm sure folks have seen these examples where somebody's copied a site and made it look like their own. This could look like your banking site, but if you look a little bit closer, the address for the site is obviously not a bank. And then when you look at the IP address, it's kind of hard to see on the screen in here, but the IP address is from Russia, right? So many red flags that this is not your bank. This is a site from 2010 where this was a pretty common way that people would be phished, where this site would be sent to them. They would click on the link and enter their credentials. The phishing got a little bit more focused to start to pivot into emailing, where you would get an email. It would look exactly like the email that you got last week from Apple or Windows or your bank or your mobile provider. But when you click on that link, you can't even see where it's going. It's going to go to a phishing site like the one we just saw. As the institutions sort of change their approach to be sort of what they call multi-channel, right? So if you're on your website, on the native app, and you're transacting or you're logging in, your bank or another financial institution may send you a text message to verify. The fraudulent actors have followed that pathway, right? So now the fraudulent actors are similarly sending you phishing and social engineering text messages that are just in line, right? They're just following the normal behaviors to make it familiar to you, so that you can so that you'll succumb to their trick. As AI has become more ubiquitous, and specifically the generative AI that's now readily available, that's now driving a new motion for really complicated deepfakes. I think the news headlines are really focused on the political aspects. I think Tom Hanks was recently deepfaked for a commercial. But what these are, from a fraud perspective, the deepfakes are used to be very surgical, very strategic in what they're constructing. So from a business perspective, what they're doing is they're taking video samples from executives, either from just quarterly earnings calls or other conferences that they're presenting on, and they're scripting out messages to other executives within the company. Well, one example that's really interesting. This adversary deepfaked a script that contacted the CFO of a company and instructed them to change the routing number and send money immediately as part of a merger and acquisition because a new law firm was helping them. They had also compromised that other executive's email and followed that up with an email address that said, as we just discussed on the phone, make that, please send that immediately. So they had completely scripted a conversation with the CFO, giving them all the account information that they wanted the money sent to, and then followed it up with an email address because of some of the other account takeover activity that had been done. And of course, the CFO did it because it was the executive that told them to do so, and it immediately made off with millions of dollars. A little bit closer to home, or that can seem kind of nebulous. A little bit closer to home, these deepfakes are also being used for spoofing siblings or family members' voices, and they'll make a call in the middle of the night to somebody to say, I'm in trouble, or I'm in, either I've lost my passport, I've been mugged, something, I'm in jail, I need you to wire me money, right? They're intentionally doing it in the middle of the night. They're taking samples of voice from that's they're on the internet, on TikTok, on YouTube, whatever, and they're constructing these deepfakes, and they're getting people to send money because they're alarmed in the middle of the night. They're getting a distressed call from a family member, and they're making these transfers. So again, it's really, really complicated. They're really thinking this out, and I'm really, really sick about it. But so to do a lot of these fraudulent, to execute these fraud campaigns, is a piece of infrastructure that's critical, which does rely on traditional banking, and that is they need a bank account, right? They need a place to take money from, and they need a place to send money to. And so there's a couple of ways that are common for these fraudulent actors to obtain banking information in sort of in the more traditional sense. So the first one is identity fraud. So they're either fabricating or stealing identity information, right? So I think there was one of the credit bureaus leaked millions of people's information, social security numbers, all the things you would need to open an account. They're taking all that leaked information, all that stolen information, and they're using it to create an account on your behalf. So what they're doing is they're creating multiple accounts, and then which is sort of taking advantage of that low friction that is sort of the reverse incentive for banks because they want to make enrollments easy. And they're building credit history. So if you have a bank account, the way that your credit score builds is they see repetitive transactions over time, direct deposits, automatic payments, just kind of normal ATM withdrawals. So they sort of set these up to build trust. And what that trust does is it actually breaks down some of the tools in the banking system that flags fraud. From there, they actually convert on the fraud from that account, right? So sometimes they may take unsecured credit, like they would get a credit card, or they would use that account to fund a loan. Or they would use that account to receive funds or send funds out. Right? It's all part of either the collection of money or the laundering of money. In addition, and then once they monetize that account, they disappear and they move right on to the next campaign. Very closely related to identity fraud is account takeover. So the fundamental difference here is rather than creating a new account and then generating the history, they take over an account that already has that history. So it's much less work for them, but it's a little bit harder of a barrier to entry because they have to either phish somebody and get them to give them their login information, or they have to purchase stolen credentials. So I'll say a smile on my face, I do this sometimes, but how many people use the same username and password on all of their accounts? Yeah. This is how phishing, this is how the use of stolen credentials works, because you may have that account. I did this at Yahoo Mail, right? Same username and password. I used that Yahoo Mail address for lots of logins. Yahoo Mail got compromised. We immediately saw Yahoo email addresses being used at banks, at travel, at leisure, credit cards, all over the place. They were kind of reusing those passwords to see who had, or they were replaying those passwords to see who had reused those passwords, right? So that's the number one mechanism for account takeover to happen, is that people reuse passwords. And everybody's guilty of it. I'm not saying you're a bad person. I'm just saying try not to do it and encourage other people not to either. So with those credentials, they're logging into the accounts. Because they have all the right information, they're sort of bypassing some of the fraud tools that are out there. Then they're setting up the payment fraud, which is either sending money out of that account or bringing money into that account. But again, because that account existed, the bank system has trust built for it, right? They understand what, or there's sort of leniency because they're an existing banking member. So they're able to kind of use that history against the bank themselves. Then again, they're monetizing that activity, that account takeover, by taking money out or sending money through it to launder the money. And then as soon as they convert on that execution of the fraud campaign, they just move on to the next one, right? And then, a month later, when you finally check your statement, like I check it once a month, maybe 2 months, that's when you're going to say, hey, there's some really weird activity that's coming in here. So they're long gone before most people even know it. I'll pause there. Any questions? Any reflections at this point? Yeah.
I was wondering, when you were giving those numbers of the fraudulent numbers,
Yeah.
is that the amount of money that has been stolen from people?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and it includes, and in case it didn't come through, the question was, are the numbers that are in the slides, are those the total numbers of money lost in fraud? And yeah, but keeping in mind, it includes both consumer fraud or fraud against consumers, as well as fraud against businesses. So it hits both sides. But yeah, it's a lot of numbers, It's a big numbers. Yeah.
I just want to make a comment, because one of our students who got certificate in cybersecurity, she was interviewed, and she said she started studying because her mother's account was used to, I don't know, illegal activities, or she lost a lot of money because of that. And so she wanted to find out why.
Yeah.
How this happened.
Yeah, motivation comes in many forms.
So people are affected,
Yeah.
ordinary people like us.
Are there tools that we can use to try and track down people that are doing this?
As consumers, very little. And then there's actually a slide, I was trying to cut down, but there's actually an interesting slide that's published by the FTC that shows the amount of fraud, and it breaks it down by dollar amount. Exponentially more fraud happens that's less than $1,000 dollar amount. So we're trying to get government agencies to do cross-border investigations to retrieve $600. Right, so it's a tough challenge for them to solve from a reactive perspective. Obviously, there's some larger, like billion-dollar fraudulent transactions that happen. If you're familiar with the banking system, so SWIFT is the infrastructure that connects the banks. Right, there was I think it was over $1 billion heist there. That had a lot of resources at it. But when somebody siphons $800, $900, $1,200 out of your account, nobody's looking for that money. Yeah. So it's really up to us as consumers, and I'll talk through this a little bit later, and the institutions to be the ones responsible to prevent it ahead of time. So I'll shift through and talk through one more use case that I think is really interesting. I will say, I'll call it out, I have the link down below. Thank you, M2P, for putting this image that I borrowed together. I did not do this. But if you've never looked at the flow of a credit card payment, it's really interesting. There's a lot of pieces involved. So in this flow, the consumers are kind of at each end. The consumers are making the purchases through the point of sale or the online transaction, or they're also the owners of the account with the issuing bank, right? Issuing their credit card to them. And that could be credit card, debit card, whatever plastic you're using. And then in between, there's a whole ecosystem, right? There's the payment gateway, the payment processor, and the network, which are facilitating the transaction. And then there's the acquirer bank, which is the bank of the producer of the goods or service, right? So that's like in an e-commerce, that's the merchant, right? So like Amazon or something. So with all these I'll call it hands in the pie, right? Because everybody's taking a cut as the money goes through. There's a lot of different areas for fraud. So at the point of sale, and we won't get into there's more complicated point of sale frauds that hit Home Depot if you want to look up that one later. But just more simply from a point of sale device where you're taking stolen cards and you're scanning them, gift cards that have been stolen, or points that you redeemed for a gift card, stolen physical cards that are swiped at the point of sale is still a big form of fraud. Less so now, especially because the credit cards come with chips, but people used to be able to just literally print their own credit card if you had an account number. So with the shift of credit card physical security, that now shifted into client-side fraud of what's referred to as card not present. So that's any time that you're doing an online transaction where you're just entering in your credit card information, entering in your debit card information, or peer-to-peer payment information, that's considered card not present. And so what that means is just simply the card isn't there, and that it's much lower barrier of entry to commit fraud there, because all you have to do is get stolen credit card information, and then you can just randomize the expiration date and whatever billing information or CVE, and you can just basically brute force it until you get the right information, the right combination of information, and then you can commit that fraudulent online transaction that gets picked up by the payment gateway. The payment processor sends it off to the acquirer bank, and then you've received your goods to then either resell or do other things with for a payment that you've never made. So shifting from the client-facing points of fraud into the acquirer banks or the merchants themselves doing fraudulent things. And there's really two main categories that happens at the acquirer bank. This is where the merchants are compromised, right? We talked about account takeover that can happen to a business just as easily as it can to a user. Or the merchant themselves, go back to the first identity fraud use case, where an adversary is opening, rather than a residential or personal banking account, they're opening up a merchant account. And so once they have this merchant ID, they can send settlement requests in batch to these issuing banks to receive funds back that for purchases that were never made, or goods that were never provided. So the acquirer bank, it needs to be mindful of that, making sure that they're not allowing merchants to be either compromised or fraudulent identity fraud account openings done as well. Lastly, on the issuing bank, right? So again, the issuing bank is where me as a consumer have partnered with to have a line of credit extended with a credit card. These are also subject to direct fraud as well. Typically comes in the form of what's referred to as chargebacks. So chargebacks are where you're going through your statement online and you're saying, I don't remember this, or this is a fraudulent charge, I'm disputing it, right? That initiates a chargeback flow. So there's the friendly fraud aspect of it, which is where me as a consumer either forget that I made that credit card purchase at 3 a.m. online, and I'm disputing it, or maybe I went to a bad e-commerce site and they've sort of stolen my credit card and started making fraudulent claims. or my account has been taken over and fraudulent payments have been made, and they use these chargebacks to create a little bit of more smoke and mirrors to sort of divert the investigation into what's really going on. So all these result in money being lost all throughout the system, but it hits each point in the credit card payment flow. All right, so what? So Rob, this is really interesting. This is entertaining. I probably could have watched a lot of this on YouTube and learned pretty much the same things, but we're talking about it live here. So I want to give you some takeaways as you're thinking about this. So there's thinking of yourselves as cybersecurity professionals. The biggest thing that you need as whether you're in cybersecurity, whether you're in a development role, whether you're in a business role working on new products, you want to make sure that you're monitoring the activity. You need to be able to spot variances in the activity, know when there's increases in failures of transactions. The second thing to keep in mind is testing. It's much cheaper for you to test and find flaws in your code, whether it be the logic or the sort of the business flows, the business dependencies. Earlier on, you find them in the testing, the better. And then reporting. I think the biggest thing that I see with clients is if they're not collaborating and reporting the findings in what they're monitoring with other business partners, they're kind of losing that communication and that understanding of what really needs to be done, really what the mission is, and then repeating the process. This is an iterative process. It will never go away as long as the product is in existence. So assume that it's going to be a monthly, quarterly, annual activity. Okay, but most of all, remember, one thing, if you remember anything from this talk, this guy, people are always the weakest link. Humans are flawed, we're great, and we're flawed. We are gonna do the most unexpected things. We're gonna fall for the most obvious tricks. We're gonna, send money, we're gonna respond. As consumers, we're gonna do things that will never completely eliminate fraud. So again, as I was saying, Robin, we have to, as builders of some of these products, builders of these business process, we have to be mindful of, humans, our consumers are going to be the weak link. But again, think of yourselves as part of that weak link as well, because humans are still designing the platforms, humans are designing the tests, humans are designing the monitoring, and humans are responsible for diligence on keeping up with that maintenance. So, I know I picked on maybe our elderly neighbor. We are just as susceptible to doing these things and allowing this type of activity as well. Then as a consumer, just don't be the weak link, right? Don't reuse passwords consciously. Use multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication if you're familiar with that, especially if it's anything that has personal information or something that can be redeemed like cash or points. Also think about where you do business. I know there's a big push with fintech that you highlighted earlier. A big push with fintech to reduce friction. I think that's a big word in the industry. Is what's the friction? What's the user friction involved in a flow? And some friction is good, right? If you're signing up for they call them neobanks, right? If you're signing up for a new bank that's all online, and they don't require a level of understanding of who you are before they start letting you connect accounts, I would not do any business with that bank. Just because it's easy, that doesn't mean it's good. And to the point about kind of chasing after funds, $500, $400, even if it's a company that you have just a small amount of money with and it's convenient, maybe you wanted it for a concert that you're going to that they had a very specific app that they required you to use. Move the money out of there as soon as you're done. Cut ties with that business as soon as you can, because you got to think about the bigger picture of fraud. Sure, as an individual, you're losing $400, $1,000, $2,000. That's really unfortunate. But if you think about all the fraudulent transactions that add up over time, that money is supporting organized crime. That money is supporting drug trafficking, human trafficking. A lot of illicit activity is driven either from collecting funds through fraud activity or through laundering funds through fraudulent activity. So I really think as a sort of a corporate citizen or a good citizen. It's really on us to make sure that we're not being overly permissive with our information, overly permissive with our systems, and that we're kind of doing the right thing by controlling what kind of fraud happens and making it as hard as possible for the fraudulent actors. So with that, I'll end it there, say thank you, but I'm happy to take questions or either on the topic or talk about other things. I could talk about professional work life. I can talk about managing kids' baseball, whatever is interesting to you. But any questions from the audience at this point?
When you have on a credit card, you have the protections when something like that happens. What can you do when you have other transaction that is not using a credit card? What is the protection from the point of view of it?
It's gonna if I understand your question is credit cards, basically your agreement with the credit card company, they as part of the agreement they protect you to reimburse for fraudulent transactions, but like a bank card might not, like a debit card. Yeah, that's just it. It just comes down to what's the agreement that you have with the bank. And there's all sorts of nuances to that too. So if you're familiar with some of the fintech tools like I draw a blank on, but like Mint is one of them. Like all these tools that aggregate all your different account information into one view. For those to work, they require you to give them your bank's information for your account. So as soon as you do that, you've technically invalidated that agreement that you had with your bank. As soon as you give your credentials to a third party, you've technically invalidated your agreement. So I raise that because it's a very common practice to do things that you don't realize invalidates those protections that you have. Now that said, the banks are realistic that the PR nightmare of holding people accountable just because they use some of these financial instruments like aggregation, they're still honoring that, but the protections that you have come down to the relationship with the institution when you signed up or how that evolved over time. Debit cards have almost no protection. Credit cards have probably the highest protection, and other sort of forms of credit are going to be somewhere in between.
What about other institutions like, I don't know, like Merrill Lynch and other things that are not a bank, but it's like
yeah, and
also it's different.
It's going to depend. I don't. You'd have to look at the specific T's and C's of your level of account. Mm-hmm. They may do things like if you enroll in two-factor authentication, they may give you a higher level of protection against fraud. So it's going to really be a case-by-case basis. So read the fine print is the unfortunate answer. Yeah.
Don't go with minimum requirements for security.
yeah, I know it's.
Take it higher, yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually wondering if you could talk, especially for students, if you talk about your daily activities. What kind of work do you do?
Yeah, so my daily activities is kind of there's probably three main categories of it. So as I said, I support a field sales team, and so is some of our largest accounts that we work with. The three categories activities are regular cadence meetings that we have just as touch points to catch up on projects and programs that are running. There's reactions to events that have occurred. Maybe they came under attack, or there was some kind of audit finding or something. And then there's the sort of what we call them strategic or proactive meetings, where we have a new use case, a new product, a new functionality that either they brought to us or we brought to them that they want to investigate, right? So that's where we kind of drive a strategic relationship forward. So there's the care and feeding of the weekly cadence meetings. There's the reaction, responding to things that come up, and then there's this growth of the strategic partnership. The growth of the strategic partnership is probably the most interesting part because you get to talk with their architects and understand. I was talking with one bank, and we were talking about how they were going to be launching a new enrollment flow, and they were concerned about automation. Hitting that enrollment flow because of two things. One, it would open and flood them with too many accounts, but as part of that automation flow, they called a third party to do validation of all the users' information. And so there was a hard cost to that. So they actually launched it as a pilot. And when they launched it as a pilot, it wasn't protected in the right way. And they actually lost $1.7 million in one weekend because automation had come through, automated the form fill out, and then all that information went off to the third party. Third party charges them per validation. And so that was a big eye opener for them. So dealing with things like that is kind of what I do on a daily basis.
Do you know if Akamai has internship for students and in the area?
Yeah, so Akamai was founded out of MIT. Is actually a doctoral student and a faculty advisor that started the company. So they're very, so we have a huge presence in Cambridge, and they're very involved with co-ops and internships. So there's co-ops, obviously through the year, internships are summer long. I think we're coming up, and Rob, I think I shared this with you.
The information, I think.
We're coming up on the application period for next summer, I think is due in November, if I remember correctly. So if you're interested, happy to connect you with folks. That is very much a closed system. I think long gone are the days where you could walk a sibling or a family member into and get them a nice internship. I think they've kind of democratized the process a little bit. So all I know are the dates in the systems. I don't have any other information there, but yeah, very involved in the collegiate community.
So a note for students, when these kind of opportunities come up, we always ask that to be included in the STEM news email that you get, I believe, every other week. So make sure you read them because there are a lot of opportunities in there.
Yeah.
And once it happens, we get the information and the application registration starts, we will post it there.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just one perspective on this is be open to a lot of different opportunities. I mean, I think my internship, I worked at a conference production company doing data entry. But once I started doing that, I just basically would bother the IT team while I was there and just talk to them. And that sort of evolved into a kind of like effectively an IT co-op from there. So don't be discouraged and don't shoot for the moon right off the bat. If you don't get it, especially if you don't have previous internship experience, sometimes they can actually be kind of hard. So just be open-minded for the right culture and the right community of people that you're going to be doing that internship with, not necessarily a specific job.
Very good advice. Yeah, practical.
Yeah, it also just also the one that pays. So
that is my the point that I do not like. Some places do not pay.
Yeah, I think that's starting to be less and less, thankfully, for the right reasons. Yeah.
By any chance, do you have an idea what's the minimum requirements for an internship? Like you need to have some.
I don't. I mean, I know the summer internships are extremely competitive because it's just not a huge pool of people. But I don't know that they publish the minimum criteria. But it's typically the people that I've met in it. They're sort of second or third year students going into either their junior or senior year of university. So they've done some type of work, either developing or work in networking before. That said, I sort of floated the idea of expanding it to outside of development, right? Getting internships in business development. I know there's internships in marketing as well, right? So it's not just coding, just development, right? There's other areas of interest.
So it's developing software development and probably networking, IT, and those.
Yeah, and marketing as well. Yeah. But I'd be open in having some help in the sales area, right? because I think that's a skill that is relevant to be developed young as well. That was actually one of my summer jobs was, anybody see the movie Boiler Room? Is that too far away?
I saw it, but I
Yeah,
can't remember.
okay.
Is it like
I had a
June
job
Bond
doing
BBC
inside
or
sales
something?
for a software company. And I think that was, coming from a development background and undergrad, doing that, it was kind of like a good experience to see how you could develop the coolest product in the world and it could do really neat things, but right, you needed to find somebody to pay for it, right, for it to really take off. So it's good to see both sides of that equation.
So that movie was about that,
Say again?
the movie that you mentioned.
Oh, no, the movie was not about that. The movie was mostly about drugs and power.
Oh,
But it was they were basically at a like long desk like this and they were just doing cold calls all day.
Yeah, I remember.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So that's what I did for a summer. Cold calls on selling software.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a typical company where you get like raises or bonuses based on productivity and stuff. A company like Akamai, like when a lot of people, there's a lot of loss in business in general.
Mhm.
So you get incentives by be able to recover or,
So,
or
yeah, it depends on the
avoiding
role, yeah. Avoiding loss.
loss or
Yeah.
something like.
So I think
how
there's,
is
it depends on your job function is the conversation. So I'm part of the sales organization, so I actually work to a sales quota. But on the engineering side, their incentives I think are based off of their bonuses are based off of overall company revenue targets. That said, there's a job function that is focused on reducing loss. There's job functions that are focused on optimizing and growing the business, right? So there's job functions that focus on that, but I think they try to have everybody on the back, well, I call it the back end, right? Everybody on the engineering and development, all with the same, working to the same incentive, which is overall revenue. But it's gonna depend.
I'd like to take a picture.
Sure.
Do you wanna?
Do you want me to take a picture?
Do you guys have any questions? No? Okay.
Close the meeting. Okay.
So
They recording.
yeah.